You're listening to Tamez Labs, the AI creativity series. I'm Jack, here with Trip. We're exploring the AI tools that help you create quality work and avoid the slop. On today's show, we're putting Suno V4 and Udio V2 head-to-head to see which one does a better job composing a 60-second sync licensable track for a brand spot.
Here is the actual question working creatives are sitting with right now. If a brand hands you a brief for a 60-second sync licensable track, something that has to clear, has to export, has to survive a music supervisor's inbox, which AI music tool do you hand that job to? Suno or Udio? Both have vocal generation, both have structural tools, both have a pitch for professional output. The answer should be complicated. It turns out it is not. And the reason it is not is almost entirely operational, not creative. That is the more interesting problem.
I went in rooting for Udio, just to be honest about it. The early reputation was tighter, more producer-brained, less toy-feeling. And before we get into any of this, the version labels in the brief we were working from needed a correction. There is no active Suno V4, and there is no confirmed Udio V2 in any official changelog. Suno is on V5.5 as of this spring. Udio uses internal model names. The tools moved and the labels did not follow. We are testing what is actually live, not what the working title said.
Right, and that framing correction matters because the gap between where these tools were labeled and where they actually are is pretty significant. Suno at V5.5 is a different instrument than the one most people have a fixed opinion about. 2 million paid subscribers, 7 million tracks generated per day, a feature set that now includes custom voice cloning, warp markers for arrangement timing, time signature control, 8+ minute track length, and commercial licensing on paid tiers. That is a production tool. Udio, meanwhile, went through a major structural rebuild after a licensing settlement with Universal in late 2025.
The result is a platform where you can generate, you can listen, and you largely cannot download. That last part deserves to sit for a second. You make something, it sounds good, and the file lives on their server. You can share a link. That is the current Udio situation on the generation and export loop working pros were actually using. The creator pushback was loud enough that the CEO temporarily reopened downloads. That is a real signal about how immediately working users hit that wall. It is not a theoretical concern. It broke existing pipelines.
The test we ran is a 60-second sync licensable track for a brand spot. The requirements are specific: clean legal status, exportable file, broadcast quality mix, and intentional structure that serves picture, intro, build, resolution in 60 seconds. Let me run Suno first because it is the one that completes the test.
So the brief I fed it was an outdoor brand spot, something that needed acoustic warmth, slight tension in the build, clean resolution. Not complex. The kind of brief a junior creative would write. First pass out of Suno V5.5 was closer than I expected at that level of prompt vagueness. The transient separation was genuinely better than what I remembered from earlier versions. The old reverb fog problem where everything felt slightly underwater, that is mostly gone. Bone-dry transients on the mix. It held up on studio monitors. Where I had to do real work was on the 60-second structural target. The warp markers tool is legitimately useful for this. You can push where the track breathes, where the hit lands. But you are still selecting from iterations, not writing to picture in a single pass. I ran maybe 12 generations before I had one with the right build arc. The hook landed around the 40-second mark, naturally, in the winning version, which for a 60-second spot is actually workable timing for the product reveal. The wave exported clean, commercial license attached to the paid tier, handed to the supervisor, done.
The pattern there is that Suno's throughput model works in your favor. The tool is optimized for fast generation and selection, not for single-pass precision. 7 million tracks a day is an infrastructure built around you running a lot of attempts and picking the one that fits. For a brand spot where 12 iterations in an afternoon is a reasonable workflow, that economy works.
Udio is a different story. and it is genuinely frustrating to report because the vocal quality is real. I fed the same brief, same outdoor brand acoustic warmth spec, and the vocal rendering on the Udio output was better. The vibrato had actual character. The pitch movement felt intentional rather than statistically averaged. There is a version of this where Udio wins the creative output side of the comparison, and the conversation is about which tool is worth building around for the quality ceiling. But you cannot export the file. You can listen to it, you can share a link. A playback-only link is not a sync deliverable. You cannot hand that to a music supervisor. The stem separation feature that Udio has, which is the right architecture for broadcast work, pulling the vocal stems separately for a TV cut versus a digital cut, is also inaccessible if the stems stay on the server. The architecture is correct.
The operational reality makes it theoretical. This is where the slop line falls differently for these two tools. For Suno, the slop line is a creative ceiling. The mix reads as AI generated to a trained ear in isolation. Real instrument simulation has a synthetic quality in sparse arrangements, and the generic brief produces the generic output. You ask for uplifting corporate, and you get the mathematical average of every uplifting corporate track in the training data. That is a craft problem, not a tool problem. The human has to own the brief specificity. For Udio, the slop line is structural. The lyric coherence issues in extended passages, the narrower genre range compared to Suno, the platform uncertainty that makes it a real risk to build a pipeline around. Those are compounded by the export restriction. The tool's creative ceiling is higher in places, and the floor is lower in others, and you cannot currently access either from a deliverable standpoint.
Both tools share the same fundamental failure on structure to picture. Neither one generates natively to a locked cut. You are always selecting from generations and trimming to fit. Suno's warp markers help significantly post-generation, but the track was not composed against your timeline. For a 60-second brand spot, that means iteration and selection is the actual workflow, not a single-pass deliverable. That is the honest working pro reality on both sides.
And both tools produce what a trained ear will recognize as AI generated when listened to in isolation at professional playback. The artifacts are different. Suno has transient smear in dense arrangements. Udio has occasional pitch glide overreach in vocals, but both are present.
The verdict here is not close, which is the frustrating part, because it could have been. Suno wins this specific test. The test is a 60-second sync licensable track for a brand spot, and the operative word is sync licensable, which means you need a deliverable file, commercial rights, and production quality sufficient for broadcast. Suno satisfies all three on a paid plan. Udio does not satisfy deliverability under its current platform configuration.
The honest qualifier is that this verdict is about current operational reality, not creative ceiling. If Udio restores export access, and the early reports suggest a paid tier path toward that is possible, the vocal performance quality and the stem architecture make it the stronger tool for brand work where the vocal is the primary creative element. The creative case for Udio exists. The working pro case requires the file.
For building a sync delivery pipeline today, something you can hand to a client, clear for broadcast, attached to a deliverable, Suno is the only tool of these two that finishes the job. Udio made the better sounding track, and it is still on their server.
What this test actually reveals is that platform architecture is now part of the craft evaluation. The mix quality question, the prompt depth question, those matter, but they are downstream of whether the output belongs to you and whether you can move it. A tool that generates and withholds is not a production tool. Watch Udio's export situation. If it opens, the comparison changes. That's the AI craft worth knowing about this week. Follow Tamez Labs if you want to stay ahead of your field and your competition. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Grep News. Tamez.